All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're taking a wild journey today, going all the way from the prehistoric floodplains of Mongolia straight to the center of a modern-day New York courtroom. It's a story that spans literally 70 million years. We're talking about one of the most formidable predators to ever walk the earth, a massive, groundbreaking international legal battle and, believe it or not, even a Hollywood A-lister.
So how exactly did a 70-million-year-old Asian dinosaur wind up at the dead center of a $1 million Manhattan true crime ring? Well, to answer that, we're going to count down 10 absolutely mind-blowing facts about the spectacular Tarbosaurus Bataar. We'll be escalating from its swampy origins, diving deep into its complex anatomy, and we'll add more and more visual evidence as we go to really see how this animal ticked. And then, finally, we'll unpack its stolen legacy. If you're into seeing the ancient world collide with modern true crime, you are absolutely in the right place.
All right, fact number 1. Let's track its initial discovery.
This massive meat-eater was discovered in 1946 and officially named in 1955 by Russian paleontologist Evgeny Malev. And man, it was instantly celebrated as Asia's very own top predator. You have to understand, those Soviet expeditions to the Gobi Desert in the late 40s, they were massive undertakings. We're talking about trekking roughly 40,000 kilometers and hauling out over 100 tons of material. When they dug up these huge stone bones, they knew right away they had something that rivaled the famous T-Rex. And here is a fun little quirk. The name Bataar actually comes from a misspelled Mongolian word that means hero. So its full scientific name literally translates to alarming reptile hero. How cool is that? Moving right along to fact number 2, which totally shatters a major misconception about where this beast actually lived. So what's really fascinating here is that the Gobi Desert, well, it wasn't a desert back then at all. The specific rock layers where Tarbosaurus is found, it's called the Nemegete Formation, tell a completely different story. Picture this, a lush Okavango Delta-style floodplain just packed with meandering river systems, seasonal wetlands, and really thick forests. And we know this for sure because of the other dinosaurs we found right alongside it, like giant duck-billed dinosaurs and the totally bizarre swamp-dwelling Dino. Basically, Tarbosaurus was the apex predator of a vibrant, swampy ecosystem, definitely not some barren wasteland.
Fact number 3 brings us face-to-face with its most famous relative, clearing up a massive debate paleontologists have had for decades.
So, while they are really closely related, the totally different environment and prey over in Asia basically forced the Tarbosaurus down its own evolutionary path. It ended up evolving into a slightly nimbler, more slender hunter than the North American T-Rex. Now, people always debate whether Tarbosaurus should just be lumped in as an Asian species of Tyrannosaurus, but when you look closely, the differences are definitely there. For example, and this is crazy, the Tarbosaurus actually had proportionally even shorter arms than the famously short-armed T-Rex. I mean, who would have thought?
Okay, fact number 4. This is where we really start to ramp up the visuals to get a grip on its specific anatomy.
Check out this top-down perspective of their skulls. Look at how the T-Rex skull on the right just flares out so abruptly and massively at the back. That's what gave its eyes that forward-facing overlap for depth perception. But then look at the Tarbosaurus skull on the left. It remains much, much narrower. Now, why does this matter? Well, this structural difference means they had completely different bite mechanisms. The heavy flaring in the T-Rex allowed for an immensely powerful, bone-crushing bite, whereas the more slender profile of the Tarbosaurus tells us it was using a totally different hunting strategy.
Fact number 5 zeroes in on a highly specific bone that basically acted as a shock absorber.
The crucial thing to take away here is that Tarbosaurus had this uniquely domed nasal bone that totally lacked the wide lateral expansion you see in T-Rex. You can see how streamlined it is right there. Think about it. When a giant theropod bites down, absolutely incredible stress forces travel right through its skull. Because the nasal bone in Tarbosaurus wasn't locked into the surrounding bones in the same wide, flat way as its North American cousin, it handled the massive stress of a crushing bite entirely differently. The forces were routed through completely different parts of the upper jaw.
Diving right into fact number 6, we find a major difference in the jaw itself, which completely flips how we view this predator's bite. These structural differences become even more obvious when we look at the lower jaws. The Tarbosaurus, over on the left, actually had this really unique locking mechanism between the dentary and angular bones in its lower jaw. What does that mean? It means its jaw was incredibly rigid. The T-Rex, on the other hand, had a much more flexible jaw that essentially acted like a giant shock absorber when it was smashing through heavy bone. Tarbosaurus just didn't need that kind of flexibility. It needed a rigid structure to slice into and hold on to its own specific type of prey.
Fact number 7 proves these differences mathematically. Let's look at the pure data behind the bones.
I was honestly amazed to learn how these numbers perfectly map out the physical realities of their two different worlds. Looking at the data, the T-Rex maxilla and dentary are significantly deeper and longer. That's because they were adapted to crush heavily armored North American dinosaurs, like Triceratops. But those heavy tank-like prey animals, they just didn't exist in the Asian environment where Tarbosaurus lived. Instead, Tarbosaurus was hunting giant long-necked sauropods and big, fleshy, duck-billed dinosaurs. So it needed a job built for a precise, slicing attack on massive, softer targets, rather than just pure bone-crushing brute force.
Fact number 8 introduces us to the teenagers of the species, and it is a truly fascinating look at how they grew up.
What you're looking at here is a remarkably well-preserved 290mm long skull of a juvenile Tarbosaurus, and it brilliantly illustrates what scientists call an ontogenetic shift, basically a massive change in physical structure as the animal ages. Notice how delicate this young skull is? It completely lacks the thick, heavy bone structures and those shock-absorbing features we just talked about in the adults. So the big takeaway here is that juvenile Tarbosaurs simply couldn't hunt what the adults hunted. They were these nimble, lightweight predators occupying entirely different dietary niches, probably chasing down smaller, much faster prey before they finally grew up to become the apex predators of those wetlands.
All right, fact number 9 totally pivots our story. We're jumping from ancient prehistory straight into a modern-day true crime thriller.
So, an illicit fossil ring actually smuggled an incredibly complete Tarbosaurus skeleton straight out of the Gobi Desert. A commercial fossil dealer by the name of Eric Prokopi managed to bring it into the United States using forged customs papers that claimed the bones were from Great Britain. In May of 2012, this actual dinosaur was sold at a Manhattan auction house for over $1 million. But thankfully, paleontologists spotted it. They immediately recognized the distinct coloring that you only get from Gobi Desert bones, and the Mongolian government stepped in. This kicked off a massive, high-stakes international legal battle involving U.S. immigration and customs enforcement and federal prosecutors.
And finally, fact number 10, the totally bizarre legal precedent and the wild celebrity twist that this case created. Because of how forfeiture laws work in the US, this turned into a super rare in rem legal case, which literally means the dinosaur itself was technically the defendant on trial. I mean, you can't make this up. The fallout of United States versus one Tyrannosaurus Bataar skeleton was absolutely immense. Not only did it expose a huge black market fossil trade, but it even forced Hollywood actor Nicolas Cage to return a stolen Tarbosaurus skull he'd bought at a Beverly Hills gallery. And just a fun little side note, he actually outbid Leonardo DiCaprio for it back in 2007.
The dealer tried to argue that Mongolian law didn't apply over in the US, but the courts completely disagreed. The skeleton was seized and formally repatriated back to Mongolia in 2013. This whole saga became a massive landmark victory for paleontology. It set a hard legal precedent ensuring that these irreplaceable, mind-blowing fossils actually remain in their country of origin for global scientists to study, rather than just vanishing forever into the private mansions of wealthy collectors.
As we've seen today, from the super rigid mechanics of its jawbone to its dramatic day in a modern Manhattan courtroom, the Tarbosaurus is just full of surprises. It was a highly specialized, alarming reptile hero that ruled a vibrant prehistoric wetland. But man, this whole saga leaves us with one massive question. With an environment so rich, what other million-dollar secrets are buried out there in the Gobi Desert, just waiting to be uncovered?